You're sitting on the side of the road during a traffic stop. The officer shines a flashlight into your vehicle. Then he notices an envelope. Maybe it's in your center console. Maybe it's in a backpack. Maybe it's sitting right on the passenger seat. Inside is cash. A lot of cash. The officer looks up and asks, "Where'd you get this money?" Most people think this is just casual conversation. It isn't, because at this exact moment, the officer hasn't decided whether the cash is simply cash or whether it might be connected to criminal activity. And in the next 5 seconds, many drivers accidentally talk themselves into a much bigger investigation. The decision point isn't when the officer finds the money. The decision point is when you start explaining it. Let's look at what usually happens. Officer, that's a lot of cash. Where'd you get it? Driver, oh, it's mine. Officer, doing what? Driver, just work. Officer, what kind of work? Driver, different stuff. Officer, what do you mean different stuff? Driver, side jobs, construction, things like that. Officer, do you have receipts? Driver, no. Officer, pay stubs? Driver, no. Officer, bank withdrawal records? Driver, no. Notice what's happening. The driver isn't being arrested. The driver isn't even being accused of a crime. But every answer creates another question. Every explanation creates another hole. Every attempt to sound convincing creates another detail that can be challenged. And that's the trap. Most people think the goal is to persuade. The officer's goal is verification. Those are two completely different things. Let's be fair. Officers encounter cash connected to legitimate activity every day, but they also encounter cash connected to drug trafficking, fraud, theft, illegal gambling, and other crimes. So when an officer sees a large amount of currency, one of the first questions is obvious. Where did it come from? Not because cash itself is illegal. It isn't. But because the answer may generate facts that can be investigated. The officer is trying to determine whether your explanation remains consistent. Does your story change? Do details shift? Do timelines move around? Do you become nervous and start guessing? The question isn't necessarily about the money. It's often about the statements. And that's where people create problems for themselves. Here is the exact moment everything changes. Officer, where'd you get this cash? Most people immediately launch into a detailed explanation, and that's the decision point, not the discovery of the cash, not the traffic stop, not the questioning. The decision point is when you voluntarily become the source of potentially conflicting information. Watch the wrong response. Officer, where'd you get this cash? Driver, I sold some equipment. Officer, what equipment? Driver, a trailer. Officer, when? Driver, last week. Officer, who bought it? I don't remember. Officer, you don't remember? Driver, well, maybe 2 weeks ago. Officer, which is it? Now the officer isn't evaluating the money. He's evaluating the inconsistencies. The encounter just escalated. Not because of the cash. Because of the explanation. Now let's look at the alternative. Officer, where'd you get this cash? Driver, I choose not to answer questions. Officer, you're not going to tell me? Driver, I choose not to answer questions. Short, clear, professional, no story, no guessing. No contradictions, no additional statements. That's the decision point. If you remember nothing else from this video, remember this sentence. I choose not to answer questions. That's it. I choose not to answer questions. Easy to remember, easy to repeat, and most importantly, it prevents you from becoming the source of information that can later be challenged. Notice what the phrase does. It doesn't argue. It doesn't accuse. It doesn't insult. It doesn't debate. It simply declines the interview. Again, I choose not to answer questions. Now let's talk about what usually happens after you say it, because officers often continue the conversation. Officer, why not? Driver, I choose not to answer questions. Officer, if you've done nothing wrong, why won't you tell me? Driver, I choose not to answer questions. Officer, it should be easy to explain. Driver, I choose not to answer questions. Notice the pattern. You're not winning an argument. You're not trying to convince anyone. You're simply maintaining the same position. Many people make a critical mistake here. They decline the first question, then answer the second, or the third, or the fourth. The protection comes from consistency, not from saying the phrase once. The moment you start explaining, you've stepped back into the trap. And now every detail can be explored. Every timeline can be examined. Every statement can be compared against evidence. That's why consistency matters. The legal principle here is straightforward. In the United States, people generally have the right not to answer investigative questions. The key point is this: remaining silent is not the same thing as lying. A false statement creates risk. A refusal to answer avoids creating new statements altogether. That's why experienced attorneys constantly remind clients of one simple rule: don't talk your way out of an investigation. You usually talk your way deeper into one. The issue isn't whether your explanation is true. The issue is whether every detail remains perfectly consistent under pressure. Most people can't do that. So let's recap. The trap is the question, where'd you get this cash? The officer isn't necessarily looking at the money. He's evaluating the information that follows. The decision point occurs the moment you start explaining. Every detail creates another question. Every answer creates another opportunity for inconsistency. The exact phrase to remember is, I choose not to answer questions. Simple, professional, easy to repeat. Because the smartest drivers understand something important. The biggest risk often isn't the cash. It's the conversation about the cash. And remember, the smartest drivers aren't the ones who talk the most. They're the ones who recognize the decision point before the officer does.